The knife had barely touched the roast when I realized I wasn't really there, not to them. I was just a seat filler, still invisible, still underestimated. My name is Juliet Dayne. I'm 30 years old, a lieutenant colonel in U.S. Army Cyber Command, and tomorrow, less than 12 hours from now, I'll walk into the corporate headquarters of Westbridge Technologies, where my father and older brother will be pitching the defense contract of their careers. They think it's a guaranteed win. They have no idea that I'm the Pentagon liaison holding the final authority to approve, or shut down, the entire project. If you've ever sat through a family dinner where every compliment skipped you like a skipped stone, subscribe to Revenge with Seren, because sometimes the quietest one at the table is the one holding all the power. It had been 5 years since I crossed that porch. The air bit colder than I remembered, a sharp mid-December wind that crept under my collar and pulled memory with it. I parked my rented SUV next to my mother's faded minivan, staring at the chipped white porch railing. Nothing had changed. That was the part that rattled me most. The porch light still buzzed overhead. The cracked welcome mat still bore the paw print outline of our old Labrador. My gloved hand hovered at the door, already knowing what was waiting inside, Logan's voice swelling with the sound of his own success. I rang the bell anyway. "It's open!" my mother shouted from the kitchen. No footsteps, no hug, no welcome pause. I stepped in. The smell hit first, dry roast beef, lemon cleaner, and something scorched in the oven. The hallway was a gallery of Logan's life. Graduation photos, wedding portraits, his boys in matching sweaters. Not a single image of me in uniform. Not my commissioning photo, not my promotion, not even the Christmas snapshot I sent from Qatar in full dress blues. It wasn't oversight, it was messaging. My mother looked up as I stepped into the kitchen. "Dinner's almost ready," she said, chipper. "Logan and Meryl should be here any minute." I nodded, slipping out of my coat. "Smells good." She beamed. "Logan just got another promotion. He's leading the systems integration team now. Everyone at your father's firm says he's headed to the top." "That's great," I replied, placing my coat neatly over a chair. "You'll congratulate him, won't you?" she added. "He's been working with some military clients lately. Big stuff." Big stuff. I didn't flinch. I had read the files last week. Project Sentinel, a sensitive cyber integration proposal between the Pentagon and Westbridge Technologies. Logan was the face of the proposal. The same proposal my team flagged for encryption vulnerabilities, the same one that required my signature to move forward. The dining table was set for 6. No place cards, there never were, but seating had always been implied. Logan at the head, Dad to his right, Mom to his left, and me, somewhere near the kitchen, like extra silverware. Logan and Meryl arrived 10 minutes later, glowing. He wore a charcoal blazer. She clutched a bottle of wine with a gold ribbon. "Hey, Jules," he said, giving me a one-armed hug while looking toward the hallway. "Long time." 5 years, I said flatly. He chuckled like I'd told a joke. "That long?" Dinner began. The roast was overcooked, the potatoes lumpy, the salad unchanged since 2003. Logan narrated the entire meal, quarterly projections, client wins, a new Pentagon contract he'd basically locked in. I sipped my water. Dad was beaming like Logan had just solved world peace. "What about you?" Mom asked, not looking up. "Still moving around with the Army?" "More or less." Dad looked up. "Still a captain?" "A little higher." Logan smirked. "That must be hard, being moved around constantly. No real game plan, just following orders." I smiled. Because upstairs, in a pressed uniform case inside my suitcase, was the rank insignia of a lieutenant colonel, earned 6 months ago. I'd briefed the Joint Chiefs. I led cyber ops that redirected global infrastructure threats, and tomorrow at 0900, I'd walk into Westbridge's boardroom, not as Juliet the sister, but as Colonel Dayne, the Pentagon's cyber integration officer for the very project he just bragged about. But I let him talk. Later, I climbed the stairs to my old room. The quilt was still the same. So were the trophies, the ribbons, the outdated snapshots of a girl they understood. Nothing from after. No trace of the woman I'd become. Downstairs, the laughter rose again. Dad's booming laugh, Logan's voice, full of himself, my mother humming her approval. They sounded like a tribe, one I no longer belonged to, and yet the irony cracked through the noise. Logan had just been promoted to lead a defense contract project, and tomorrow he would discover that his invisible sister was the one holding the pen that could stop it cold. I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the uniform case beside me. Let them have tonight, because tomorrow, they'll remember exactly who I am. Have you ever held back your truth just long enough to let someone underestimate you? Tell your story in the comments. We see you. I arrived 15 minutes early. Not just because of habit, because of control. Because in my world, being early isn't just professional, it's strategic. The Westbridge Technologies parking lot gleamed with luxury sedans and electric government vehicles. Behind tinted glass, executives adjusted ties, rehearsed pleasantries, and carried coffee cups like shields. But nothing they practiced would prepare them for what they were about to see. The sign near the entrance read, Project Sentinel Executive Review, 9 a.m., Conference Room 4B. I parked in a reserved DoD spot, adjusted the collar of my full-service dress, and stepped out. The navy blue uniform cut sharp across the shoulders. My silver oak leaf insignia caught the morning light, every ribbon on my chest aligned with precision. There was no mistaking my rank or my authority. A man in a branded windbreaker slowed when he passed. His posture straightened as his eyes flicked to the insignia on my shoulder. "Good morning, Colonel," said the security officer at the entrance, scanning my military badge with a nod of deference. "Morning," I replied evenly. "I'm here for the Sentinel review." "Escalators to your left, ma'am. Conference room 4B is already open." Upstairs, the silence was engineered. Thick carpets, glass walls, polished chrome, a curated environment meant to suggest power without ever needing to say it. But I had no need to suggest anything. I was the only one walking in with actual command. The doors to 4B were slightly ajar. Inside, Lorraine Hart, CEO of Westbridge, was reviewing briefing folders at the head of the table. 2 directors were already seated. My brother, Logan, hadn't arrived yet. I stepped in. Lorraine looked up, paused, then smiled. "Colonel Dayne," she greeted, rising to shake my hand. "I didn't realize you'd be attending in person." "This contract's too critical to evaluate from a distance," I said. "We're approaching milestone thresholds. I need first-hand observation." "Well said," she replied, firm handshake. "You'll set the tone just by being here." She turned to the others. "Everyone, this is Lieutenant Colonel Juliet Dayne, the Pentagon Liaison for Project Sentinel. Her technical and operational assessments will directly determine whether we move to full-stage funding." A pause swept the room. No one said it, but I saw it in their posture. Surprise, recalibration, the quick mental math that comes when you realize the most powerful person in the room wasn't the one you expected. I took my seat, 2 chairs to Lorraine's left. My name already printed on the placard. The room quieted. I opened my folder, pen steady in hand. Exactly 1 minute before 9 o'clock, the door opened. Logan walked in, tablet in hand, suit pressed, stylus twirling between his fingers. Mid-laugh, his voice too loud, trailing behind my father, who wore a sharp suit and the pride of a man expecting to control the room. Then Logan saw me. He stopped. His voice died mid-breath. His eyes went from my face to the uniform to the placard, and I watched the recognition hit like a low-grade shock. "Juliet?" he said slowly, as if the name didn't fit anymore. What's going on?" I didn't stand. I didn't blink. "Good morning, Mr. Dayne," I said clearly. "I'm here for the Project Sentinel Executive Review." Behind him, my father froze. Lorraine, without missing a beat, addressed the room. "As a reminder, Colonel Dayne is overseeing cyber integration for this contract. Her evaluation is required for due advancement. She will be leading today's technical review." My father's eyes narrowed. He glanced at Lorraine, then at me, then at my uniform, finally seeing it. But I didn't give him time to catch up. I opened my notes and began. Our assessment begins with system encryption latency. The third-party audit flagged discrepancies that need to be addressed before Q1. I'll need a response timeline and mitigation strategy. Lorraine gave me a nod, then turned to the others. Logan, you're up. He walked slowly to the front of the room, posture suddenly unsure. As systems integration lead, he began, clearing his throat, I've been refining a deployment plan that aligns with our benchmark projections. His voice cracked slightly. Good. He finished with a scatter of tech jargon and soft backpedaling. I let a full second pass before responding. Mr. Dayne, could you clarify how your revised plan meets the encryption thresholds defined in Memorandum 612C? He blinked. I'll need to double-check that section. You'll need to submit it by Thursday. COB, I replied. The Pentagon's compliance calendar doesn't shift. He nodded, tight, palms probably sweating, voice hollow. Yes, ma'am. The meeting continued. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't challenge anyone unnecessarily. But every question I asked recentered the room around one truth. I wasn't there as someone's sister. I was there as the officer with final authority. My father barely spoke. Logan kept his eyes on the table. When the meeting adjourned, Lorraine stood. Colonel Dayne will remain on site for the duration of the review cycle. Please extend full access. This project has national scope, and Colonel Dayne's role reflects that. I gathered my folder, nodded once, and walked out. Behind me, the silence didn't follow. It stayed in that room, with the people who once dismissed me. Has anyone ever realized too late that you were the one holding the outcome all along? Drop your story below, because your power deserves to be witnessed. The hallway outside Conference Room 4B held its breath. Frosted glass panels glinted under recessed lighting, and the hush of the executive floor made every footstep feel louder than it should. I stood alone near the far window, posture straight, uniform still razor-sharp, rank visible from 20 feet away. Let them see it. Let it speak before I do. My father exited first. He didn't look at me, just walked past with eyes fixed on the patterned carpet, as if the answer to his discomfort might be stitched into the threads. Logan followed. His pace slowed. His bravado had not caught up. You're really a colonel? He asked, like he was reading the rank off a riddle. Lieutenant Colonel, I said. And yes. He blinked. I thought you were still overseas, maybe stationed at Ramstein. I didn't even know you were back. You didn't ask. His face tightened, not in anger, in realization. You could have told us, he offered, almost pleading. I did, I said, measured. I emailed you the promotion, sent the invitation, mailed the certificate. No reply. He opened his mouth, closed it. A sheepish nod was all he could manage. It's a lot, he mumbled, to take in. I let the silence widen between us like a deliberate pause in an operation brief. Then he tried again, lighter this time. I wasn't trying to undermine you in there. I just didn't expect you to be on that side of the table. That was intentional, I said calmly. You weren't supposed to. He looked down at the tablet still clutched in his hand. Dad's not taking this well. That's his concern. I'm not here for him. That landed. He didn't argue. And for once, neither did I. Back on the third floor, I returned to the temporary office Westbridge had set up for government liaisons. 4 walls, 1 window, and a sterile desk with just enough space for my laptop, encrypted badge reader, and a legal pad I always carried. I logged into our internal due oversight portal. 3 system flaws flagged, 2 of them approved by Logan. No time for ego, no time for family baggage. This wasn't personal, it was national infrastructure. I leaned back for a moment, staring at the screen, not with fatigue, with clarity. This is the job. This is the reason I outranked them. Because while Logan was busy performing competence, I had been building it. In bunkers, in briefing rooms, in early morning war rooms filled with maps no civilian ever sees. My authority didn't come from volume, it came from verification. And if my last name hadn't been Dayne, none of them would have questioned why I was seated where I was. But because it was, they never thought to look. That evening, in my Arlington apartment, I hung the uniform back on its padded hanger. My silver oak leaf insignia caught the warm light spilling through the blinds. This wasn't just a title, it was a testament. Every field report, every midnight server breach I resolved, every classified incident I led and de-escalated before it made headlines. My family had never asked about any of it. They remembered the girl who turned down an MBA, not the woman who'd written cybersecurity policy for 3 federal agencies. To them, I had vanished into bases and uniforms. Always somewhere. Always unavailable. But I hadn't vanished. I had risen. And now they had no script for the woman who returned. No language for the one who came back with rank they couldn't diminish. The next morning, I arrived at 0745 sharp. Lorraine was already in the executive lounge, reviewing encryption patch notes. "Colonel," she greeted, offering a nod. "Thank you for yesterday. You cut through a lot of the noise." "That's what I do," I replied. "Noise obscures risk." She smiled. "I've already spoken to Logan. He's adapting." "He'll have to, if he wants to keep his clearance." She didn't flinch, just nodded, respectful, steady. "You weren't what they expected," she said, "but you were exactly what they needed." I didn't respond. I didn't need to. She saw me. No qualifications, no hesitation. And in that moment, I realized something that stopped me cold. Lorraine Hart had never met Juliet the daughter, only Colonel Dayne. And that made all the difference. The second-day review began at 900 hours sharp. 3 project leads joined. Logan came last. This time he sat further from the center. When his section came up, he presented without swagger, just data, measured, careful. "As systems integration lead," he said, "I've incorporated the latency corrections per Cyber Command guidance. I believe the adjusted rollout aligns with federal benchmarks." He flicked to the next slide, then turned toward me slightly. "Captain," he paused, caught himself. "Colonel, would you like me to review the adjustments?" There it was, the slip, the instinct to minimize, the habit that hadn't quite caught up with reality. "No need," I replied. "I already ran a simulation. The numbers hold. Just ensure the audit trail is clean by Thursday." "Yes, ma'am." No sarcasm, no smirk, just professionalism. He sat down. The room moved forward. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't gloat. But I didn't shrink either. Because in that moment, he corrected himself. Not because I demanded it. Because I'd made it impossible not to. After the second review session, Lorraine asked if I had 5 minutes. I followed her down the marble hallway, 2 women in sharp heels, no wasted words. The executive floor was silent except for the soft tap of our steps and the occasional buzz of a phone left unanswered. Her office was what you'd expect from someone who didn't have to prove power. Minimalist, clean, strategic. A panoramic view of Arlington framed her desk. No family photos, no desk clutter. Just a framed quote behind her chair. "Clarity before comfort." She motioned for me to sit. I didn't, not right away. "I wanted to say this without the room watching," she began, "but your presence raised the floor. Expectations are sharper now. That's what good leadership does." I nodded. My job isn't to soothe, it's to fortify. She smiled, just slightly. "Your brother is talented, but he's been floating on narrative. You? You're not the story they expected, but you're the standard they'll remember." I didn't flinch. I'd heard variations of that sentence in every room I've ever entered as a woman in uniform. "You're not what we pictured. You surprised us. You're different, in a good way." Always said with admiration, always tinged with doubt. She watched me carefully. "Do they know who you are? Your family?" I returned her gaze. "They know my name. They don't know my rank." She gave a quiet nod, not sympathy, recognition. "That must have made yesterday personal." "Not personal, just overdue." Lorraine closed her folder, then stood and extended her hand. "You're welcome here any time, Colonel, and not because of your title." I shook her hand. Her grip was steady, real, the kind of respect I had stopped hoping for at home. That evening, I returned to my parents' house. I hadn't planned to, but silence after a victory can echo louder than applause. My mother was in the kitchen, sealing leftovers into plastic containers. She looked up, startled. "Oh, you're back?" "I had time before the flight." She offered a polite smile, then gestured to the counter. "There's some roast left. Logan said the boardroom thing went well." "The boardroom thing?" She nodded, already turning toward the fridge. "The meeting. He said you were there. Didn't mention you were involved." "I wasn't just present," I said. "I ran it." She blinked. "Ran it?" "I'm the Pentagon Liaison for Project Sentinel. I oversee the contract Logan presented." Her mouth opened slightly, then closed again. She stared at the insignia on my collar like it was a Halloween costume. "I thought you were still a captain." "I was promoted last year, lieutenant colonel now." She fumbled for words. "I didn't know." I mailed the announcement, emailed the photo, left a voicemail. She looked down. "I guess I didn't understand what it meant." "That's the pattern, isn't it?" Her face didn't harden, it folded inward, embarrassment more than guilt. "I was proud of you," she said softly. "I just didn't know how to talk about it." "You always knew how to talk about Logan's titles." She didn't deny it, and that, somehow, hurt more than if she had. Later, I found my father in the den. TV muted, a news panel flickering in silence. He didn't look up as I entered. "I assume you know now." Still no movement. "You're in uniform," he said. "Didn't expect that." "I've been in uniform for 10 years. You never wore it here." "I never thought it was welcome." He looked up then, slowly. "I thought you'd come back eventually, to the company, to something stable." "I am stable," I said. "I lead federal cybersecurity risk operations across national infrastructure. That's about as stable and high risk as it gets." "That's not what I meant." "I know. You meant the business you built with Logan, the path I was supposed to follow." He didn't argue. I stepped forward. "Lorraine respects me. She saw my rank, my decisions, my protocols, and deferred." "You're proud of that?" "I'm not ashamed of it." He exhaled slowly. "You've always been smart, just never thought this was where it would go." "It's exactly where I intended it to go. You just weren't watching." He didn't answer, and this time I didn't need him to. That night, I sat alone in my childhood bedroom. Everything looked the same. The quilt, the trophies, the dried-out ribbons, a shrine to a version of me they could process. But I no longer fit in this frame, because I wasn't that girl anymore, and maybe that's why they kept pretending not to see me, because if they admitted who I'd become, they'd have to face who they failed to recognize. At 10:30, my phone buzzed. "Logan." I hesitated, then answered. "I just wanted to say," he began, awkward, "you were good in there." "Thank you." "I mean it. You didn't grandstand, you didn't humiliate anyone, you were just clear. That's what the job requires." He paused. "I didn't know what you'd become, but I'm starting to." I stayed silent, because, for once, he wasn't asking me to reassure him. He was just saying something true, and that was enough. At Lorraine's office, I was Colonel Dayne. At home, I was still just Juliet. But after that week, something shifted. Not loudly, not all at once. And when they looked at me now, they didn't see pride. They saw awareness. They hadn't changed, but they could no longer pretend I hadn't. The meeting room was colder than I remembered. Not because of the air conditioning, but because the tension had found a way to settle in the walls. I sat at the far end of the polished walnut conference table, the Pentagon-issued badge clipped neatly to my lapel. Across from me sat a panel of defense analysts, procurement officers, and private sector consultants. Each had a stake in the contract we were reviewing. Each had a motive. But only one had the clearance that mattered: me. This was the moment, the one I had worked toward for over a decade. Cyber Intelligence Division, classified Tier 4, my protocol, my framework, my fingerprints on every line of the architecture. But then Logan leaned forward. "My sister's team was brought in to consult on the encryption angle," he said smoothly, folding his hands like a man accustomed to winning. But the overarching infrastructure, data routing, fail-safe design, that came from our Virginia headquarters. The air shifted. I didn't flinch. I didn't speak. I watched. Watched the subtle nods of agreement from the room, watched the way Logan redirected every strategic credit back to his company, and watched my father, seated beside him, offer no correction, no clarification. The two of them, one feeding the lie, the other letting it grow. I didn't fight back in that moment. I simply opened the binder I'd brought with me, redacted only for names, and slid it gently across the table to the department's senior advisor. Pages 7 through 14 contain the original risk matrix and recovery flow, I said calmly. All time-stamped, all executed through a closed military channel 6 months before private contractors were looped in. He raised an eyebrow. Your team authored this? No, I said. I did. Logan's jaw tightened, but he didn't speak. The advisor kept reading. Silence stretched. Not uncomfortable, just undeniable. Colonel Dayne, he said slowly, are you suggesting your work was passed off under another entity's leadership? I'm not suggesting anything, I replied, voice smooth as glass. I'm providing verification. What you choose to believe is your responsibility. I didn't look at Logan, because this wasn't about him anymore. Later that evening, back at my office on base, I stared at the after-action report sitting open on my desktop. It was done. The department had confirmed the source of the framework. I would retain full authorship recognition, and the contract would include a Pentagon-approved citation linking all technical IP back to my oversight. It wasn't revenge. It was just the truth, written down in places where lies couldn't hide anymore. And yet, something inside me still ached. Not for the contract, not for the recognition, for the family that still couldn't see the difference between what they wanted to believe and what had always been mine. At 10:17 p.m., my phone buzzed. Logan, we should talk. You blindsided me today. I let the screen dim. A second message followed. Logan, Dad thinks you overstepped. He said it wasn't the time or place to correct anything. Correct anything, as if I had told a lie. I didn't respond. Instead, I walked to the mirror, unpinned my badge, and stared at the reflection of a woman who had learned to carry her own credentials, whether they were welcomed or not. I had been taught to defer, to support, to step aside quietly so others could shine. But somewhere along the way, I realized no one was stepping aside for me, so I stopped asking. 2 days later, I received a certified letter from the department confirming my technical authorship. It was addressed to Colonel Juliet Dayne, not Logan's sister, not General Dayne's daughter, just me. That weekend, I skipped the family dinner. No apologies, no excuses. I spent the evening in my garden, pruning back a row of early irises, letting the quiet remind me that truth doesn't always need company to matter. It just needs to be protected. And this time, I had protected it, with documentation, dignity, and restraint. That was my quiet revenge, and it had already begun to echo in all the places my family never expected. The morning after I flew back to D.C., I unpacked my suitcase in silence. My apartment was clean, spare, everything in its place, just like I liked it. The blinds were half open, letting in soft winter light that slid across my floor like a reminder. I was home now, and this home was mine. The uniform went back on the hanger. The insignia caught a glint of sunlight before disappearing beneath the garment bag. I zipped it slowly, carefully, like sealing away something sacred. There was no applause here, no one to nod or ask questions or tell me they were proud, but I didn't need it. That was the difference between now and when I first commissioned. Back then, I had hoped every milestone would be the one that finally got through to them, but they never saw it. Not when I graduated from officer candidate school in the top 5%. Not when I was first deployed to Ramstein on short notice, assigned to monitor encrypted asset transfers across digital borders most people didn't know existed. Not when I was promoted to major after leading a classified protocol audit that closed 3 potential points of breach across federal servers. They didn't come to my ceremonies. They didn't ask what I did overseas. They never even replied when I sent the Defense Journal article about the cyber attack we thwarted before it hit the public networks. To them, I was the one who left. And they never cared where I landed. 6 years ago, I stood in the back of our family's living room in uniform, still new to the Army, shaking with a mix of adrenaline and uncertainty. I had flown home on a 3-day pass to tell them I'd been selected for an accelerated command track. Logan had just closed his Series B funding round. Dad had toasted to him before I finished my sentence. I left the house that night without saying goodbye. No one called. That was the last time I tried to explain my path to them. Since then, I had built a career they couldn't pronounce. I had led operations they weren't cleared to hear about. I had briefed generals and testified in closed-door sessions. I had become the person they claimed to want me to be, strategic, capable, disciplined, but not in the way they wanted. And because they couldn't define it, they ignored it. That kind of silence shapes you. It makes you precise. Back at work, I dropped into rhythm quickly. My days were filled with encrypted briefings, strategic rollout plans, contractor assessments, and new project protocols. I was back in my element: logic, clarity, and sharp, detail-oriented execution. Still, something lingered. At night, after meetings and mission reports, I would sit with my coffee and stare at the blank space above my bookshelf. There was no family photo, no childhood memorabilia. Just a shadow box frame with 3 medals, 2 citations, and 1 unframed photograph of my unit standing outside a reinforced comms center in Afghanistan. Every face sunburned, every mouth mid-laugh. It was one of the few places I had ever felt seen. Cyber Command doesn't make the news. We don't wear battle ribbons or star in recruiting commercials, but we protect the battlefield before anyone ever gets there. We intercept threats that don't explode, but corrupt. And the weight of that kind of warfare isn't loud. It's quiet, invisible, constant, just like the way my family had dismissed it for years. 2 weeks after the Westbridge review, Lorraine emailed me a follow-up. Subject: Outcome Metrics, Your Oversight. Julietta wanted to share that your intervention helped us avoid a 3-month delay and a multi-million-dollar compliance correction. The board has authorized a permanent liaison seat for all future military contracts. Also, your brother has adopted the encryption rework you proposed. He didn't love it at first, but now he quotes you. Just thought you should know. Lorraine. I stared at the message longer than I meant to, not because it surprised me, but because I knew she didn't send that email out of flattery. Lorraine Hart didn't have time to coddle anyone. She saw value, and she named it. That was all I'd ever wanted from my family. Not celebration, not parades, just acknowledgement, just someone to say, I see what you've done. That weekend, I visited the National Archives with a group of junior officers I mentored. It was a tradition I'd started, showing them the history they were now part of. I stood back while they stared at the Constitution behind the thick glass. Most of them were in their early 20s, still figuring out what it meant to serve, still thinking about home. One of the officers turned to me. "Ma'am," she said, "do your parents get what you do?" I hesitated, then answered honestly, but it doesn't stop me from doing it." She nodded like she understood more than her age should allow, and in that moment, I felt something shift. Not in regret, but in pride. Not the kind given to you, the kind earned, internal, undeniable. Back at home that evening, I opened the drawer beside my bed and pulled out the envelope I hadn't touched in months. It was the letter from my promotion to lieutenant colonel, the one I had printed and mailed to my parents' house with a handwritten note. They had never acknowledged receiving it, but I kept a copy anyway, because I had learned something powerful. You do not need your family's validation to build your own legacy. I pressed the envelope into the back of a new frame and slid it onto the empty space above the bookshelf. One quiet square, white paper, clear print, rank, date, name, Lieutenant Colonel Juliet Dayne, United States Army, Cyber Command Division. Effective 6 months prior. I stood back and stared at it for a moment, not out of vanity, but completion. They never put me on their wall. So I built my own. And this time I didn't need anyone to notice, because finally, I did. 3 weeks after the Westbridge Review, I was called into a high-security meeting at Fort Meade. It wasn't unusual. Liaison officers in Cyber Command are regularly briefed on threat escalations, defense contracts, and operational crossovers. What made this one different was what happened after the meeting. My commanding officer stayed behind. He was a hard man to read. Career intelligence, zero small talk. But that afternoon, he closed the door and turned toward me with something bordering on a smile. "You'll be taking lead on the Sentinel expansion," he said. I kept my posture still, but something tightened in my chest. "Pentagon wants to fast-track Phase 2, he continued. "They've approved your oversight for a multi-agency rollout, total contract control. Budget estimates place it between 90 and 110 million over the next 2 years. I nodded slowly. "Understood, sir." "You'll be the youngest officer in Cyber Command to lead a program with this clearance." That part I already knew. What I didn't expect was the final sentence. "And frankly, Colonel Dayne, you're the reason it didn't collapse last quarter." He didn't need to say more. I had earned this, not by playing the game, but by rewriting it. When I walked back into Westbridge Technologies a week later, it wasn't as a visiting liaison. It was as the appointed program lead for all military integration related to Sentinel. They had reserved a secure room for me on the executive floor. My name was on the door, my credentials registered through a second badge reader. When I entered the boardroom that morning, people stood, including Logan. He looked surprised, but not in the startled way he had back in December. This time, there was something else on his face, something unfamiliar. Respect. "Good morning, Colonel," he said. Not Jules, not Captain. Colonel. I took my seat at the head of the table, placed my notes beside the budget projections, and nodded toward Lorraine Hart. "Let's begin." During the break, I stepped into the hallway for a moment of quiet. Logan followed. He didn't say anything at first, just stood beside me, hands in his pockets, shoulders slightly hunched, not like the brother who used to dominate every room, but like someone who had just realized the room had changed. "You really have control over the entire project?" he asked. "Yes." "And the budget?" "Every line." He exhaled. "They never thought you'd amount to anything, you know." "I know." He looked over at me. "I did." I met his eyes. "That was your mistake," I said. He didn't argue. "I used to think you were just gone," he said. "Floating. No direction. Dad said the military was for people who didn't know what else to do. I chose it. That was the difference." He nodded slowly. "Yeah, it shows." There was no apology. Not exactly. But I didn't need one. Because in that pause, after years of being written off, excluded, sidelined, I heard something that mattered more. Truth. That night, back in D.C., I opened my laptop to review a project summary Lorraine had sent. It included a forwarded message from the Pentagon's Contract Oversight Committee. Colonel Dayne's leadership over the Sentinel initiative has resulted in unprecedented coordination across 3 key departments. Her authority on cybersecurity risk assessment is being used to inform future liaison assignments at DoD partner firms. I read it twice, then closed the screen. In my kitchen, the kettle clicked. The city outside my windows pulsed with late-night energy, sirens in the distance, lights blinking across high-rises. I moved through the space slowly, calmly, like someone who finally belonged in their own life. They thought I had ruined mine by walking away from business school. They thought I had wasted my education by running off in uniform. They thought I had no plan, no strategy, no future. But the Pentagon had trusted me with $100 million. And for the first time, I wasn't trying to prove anything. I was just leading. The following weekend, I met my parents for dinner at a restaurant in Georgetown. It was their suggestion. Upscale, quiet, a place where everyone spoke in soft tones and clinked glasses with practiced elegance. My father was already seated when I arrived. He stood as I approached, then hesitated. "You're not in uniform," he said. "I don't wear it to everything." He smiled faintly. Still, hard not to picture it. My mother arrived shortly after, wearing a navy wool coat and the pearls she only pulled out when she didn't know what else to wear. We ordered, talked about the weather, about her book club, about Logan's kids. It was easy. And somehow that made it harder. Eventually, she leaned across the table and asked, "Are you happy?" I paused, not because I didn't know, but because I realized I'd never been asked that before. "Yes," I said, "I am." My father cleared his throat. "We were wrong," he said. I looked up. "About the army, about you, about what it means to lead." It wasn't flowery. It wasn't emotional. But it was honest. And for us, that was enough. Back home, I tucked the printed contract authorization letter into the back of my planner. It wasn't something I needed to display, but I wanted to keep it close. Because for years I had walked into rooms where no one expected anything from me, and now I walked into rooms where everything waited for my word. That wasn't revenge, it was evolution. And it was mine. The third day of follow-up reviews at Westbridge began quietly. No press, no noise, just a closed-door session between the Department of Defense Liaison team, my team, and the remaining executives involved in Project Sentinel's integration scope. Logan wasn't on the day's agenda. He had completed his portion 2 days prior, submitted revisions on time, and sat in the background during the last meeting without interruption. I assumed he had gone back to whatever internal metrics needed smoothing out. But when I stepped into the hallway after briefing the Legal Oversight Division, I found him waiting by the elevator. Alone. He wasn't checking his phone. He wasn't glancing around casually. He was standing with his arms folded, jaw set in that tense, unfinished way. The way someone stands when they came looking for you, but don't know how to start. He didn't smile. He didn't pretend to bump into me. He just spoke. "I've been thinking about what you said," he said quietly. I waited. About not being asked, about nobody showing up. He looked at me now, eyes clearer than they'd been in years. "You were right." I didn't let him off the hook. "That wasn't the point," I replied. He nodded, "But it's still true." There was a pause. "I used to think I was the one holding everything together," he said. "The family, the company, the reputation. I thought I was carrying the weight." He exhaled and his voice dropped. "But the whole time, you were doing it too, just in places I didn't look." I didn't reply. I didn't rescue him from the silence. Letting him sit in it was part of the lesson. "I don't know how to come back from that," he admitted. "You've outranked me, not just here, everywhere, and I didn't even see it coming." I looked at him, steady. "This wasn't about rank," I said. "It was about respect. You thought you were the one building something, but you were just assuming the world would make room for you. I carved my place." He lowered his head slightly, not in shame, just recognition. "I didn't expect to feel small around you," he admitted. I gave him a soft nod. "I didn't need you to feel small. I just needed you to see me clearly." He smiled, just faintly. "I do now." Later that evening, back in D.C., I sat at my dining table, the same one I had bought 5 years ago with my first bonus after the Qatar rotation. It was nothing fancy, solid wood, 4 chairs, 1 slightly uneven leg, but it had held more of my life than any room in my parents' house. On the surface were 3 folders. One was from the Pentagon's Contractor Oversight Division. One was from Cyber Command's Internal Audit Office. The last, light blue, was personal. Inside were documents I hadn't touched in months, cards from old unit members, a letter from my mentor who had retired last year, and a faded printout of an article titled, "Young Officer Leads DoD Encryption Response After Global Attack Threat." It had my name under the headline, not that anyone from home ever mentioned it, but as I flipped the page I noticed something, a sticky note tucked near the corner, in Logan's handwriting. "Didn't know about this until last week. You stopped something big. We should have said something back then. I'm saying it now. L." I stared at the handwriting. The slant of it. The awkwardness of the apology wrapped in 3 lines. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't an Instagram-worthy quote, but it was something he had never given me before. A moment of self-awareness. Not for credit, not for show. Just truth. 2 days later, Logan sent me a calendar invite. Lunch? Not family dinner, not some fake obligation. Just the two of us. No expectations. I accepted. We met at a small bistro near my office, halfway between Westbridge and the Pentagon campus. He arrived first, already seated. No blazer this time, just a white shirt rolled at the sleeves, like someone trying less hard to look important. When I walked in, he stood, not in formality, in respect. "Menu's pretty short," he said. "I figured you'd like that." I smirked. Still know my style. We talked. Not just about work, but about real things. He asked questions this time, about how many people I supervised, about what deployment was like, about what it felt like to sign a document knowing your signature affects systems across federal agencies. I gave honest answers, no edge, no sarcasm, and for the first time in a decade, it didn't feel like performing. It felt like sharing. Halfway through his meal, he said, "I told Dad you're leading Phase 2 now." I raised an eyebrow. Did he have anything to say? Logan shrugged. Not much. Just looked away for a while, then said, "We were wrong." I stirred my coffee. He said that to me at dinner, too. Logan looked at me carefully. "You think he meant it?" "I think it's all he has," I replied. He built his world around one version of success, and when I didn't fit it, he assumed I failed. But now that I've made it, just in a different direction, he doesn't know what to do with that. Logan nodded slowly. "Yeah, that sounds like him." There was a pause, then he added, "You changed something in that room, Juliet. And not just in the boardroom, in the family." I looked up. "It wasn't to change anything." He smiled. "I know. That's why it worked." After we left, he walked with me partway down the block. Before parting, he turned and said one last thing. "Thanks for not humiliating me. You could have, but you didn't." "I wasn't there for you," I said. "I was doing my job." That's what made it more powerful. He extended his hand, not stiff, not performative. I shook it. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't redemption. It was acknowledgement. Brother to sister, professional to professional. And for the first time, the ground between us felt level. The knock came early, before sunrise, before coffee, before I had finished folding the last load of laundry. It was a Saturday morning in March. Cold light filtered through the sheer kitchen curtains, casting long shadows across the hardwood floors of my townhouse in Arlington. The house wasn't large, but it was mine, paid off, renovated slowly over 4 years with bonuses no one in my family ever asked about. When I opened the door, I expected a delivery, maybe another package of encrypted drives from Cyber Command. But it wasn't that. It was my father, wearing a brown wool coat that looked like it belonged to someone 2 decades older, his hands in his pockets, shoulders stiff from a kind of tension that had nothing to do with the wind. Behind him stood Logan. They didn't look alike in that moment. One was holding something invisible, maybe shame. The other, something heavier, change. "Can we come in?" Logan asked first. I stepped aside. No one said anything until I closed the door. My father sat in the chair across from the fireplace. The last time he had been in this home was the week I moved in. He hadn't said much then either, just surveyed the space like it was temporary, like I'd be back home soon enough after that military thing wore off. But now he looked at the framed certificate from the Department of Defense that hung above my bookshelf, the one with the Pentagon seal, the one that read, "Outstanding Civil Military Liaison, Colonel Juliet Dayne." He didn't ask about it, but he kept looking. "You've made this place something," he finally said. I sat across from him, letting the pause stretch out. "It's a good neighborhood." He nodded. Quiet. Solid. I waited. Then Logan spoke. "We didn't come to talk about the house." My father cleared his throat. "We came because it was overdue." I tilted my head slightly. What was? There was a long silence. Then my father said something I hadn't heard since I was 16. I was wrong. The words weren't poetic. They weren't even particularly brave, but they were real. He looked down at his hands. I thought the world worked one way, that there was one path, one measure of success, and I made that your burden. You always walked your own path, and I mistook that for failure. I swallowed hard, not because I needed to cry, but because I needed to stay in control. I wasn't ready to let emotion hand him anything more than what he came for. He looked up again. When you were promoted last year, I didn't know how to process it. A colonel, in D.C., signing contracts we don't even understand. Logan smiled quietly from the corner. I crossed my legs, calm. You didn't have to process it, just see it. He nodded. I see it now. After coffee was poured, awkwardly, slowly, we sat at the table, and my father finally asked questions. About my work, about the department, about why I never told him I was writing policy memos that shaped national cybersecurity protocols. I answered truthfully, not to impress, not to win, but because I had waited my entire adult life for someone in my family to simply be curious about who I really was. When I showed him the side office, my converted den where I kept books, plaques, a photo of me in fatigues with the 509 Intelligence Battalion, he stopped at a small frame that contained a single note, the sticky note from Logan. He read it silently, then looked back at me. You kept that? He asked. I shrugged lightly. It was the first time anyone acknowledged it without me having to explain. He exhaled slowly. I didn't come here to pretend everything's fixed, he said, but I wanted you to know I see you, not just what you've done, but who you are now. That's when I finally spoke the words I'd rehearsed for years, but never said until that moment. I was never looking for approval, I said. I just needed the space to become myself, and now I don't need permission to stay here. He nodded, as if the words landed exactly where they were meant to. I know, he said. That's why we came to your door, not the other way around. As they left that afternoon, Logan hung back for a second longer. You okay? He asked, watching my father walk toward the car. I nodded. This time, I am. You're not going to hold it over him? He asked gently. No, I said, stepping into the doorway. That's not the point. He can carry his own silence. Logan gave me a long look, one filled with the same mixture of respect, guilt, and relief I'd seen on his face outside that elevator weeks ago. You know what I told Mom last week? He asked before walking down the steps. What? That maybe you're not the black sheep. Maybe you're just the one who left early and figured it out alone. I smiled faintly. Sometimes that's the only way to grow. Then I closed the door behind him, not out of finality, but peace. They came to my home, on my time. And this time they came with open eyes. The last time I attended a strategy session with my father's company, I was 26 and invisible. I remember the polished conference table, the circular seating arrangement, and how no one made room for me. I stood in the back, beside the printer, while my brother presented a slide deck I had helped him build. He never mentioned my name. My father never introduced me, and afterward, a senior partner asked if I could grab coffee for the room. That memory had lived in me like a scar, until now. Because on this bright Monday morning, in a conference room 15 stories above K Street, the team was quoting something from my defense procurement briefing. Verbatim, not knowing it was mine. And if we stagger the review phases like Colonel Dayne outlined in the Pentagon compliance loop, we reduce audit risk by 23%, said the COO. The man to his left nodded, flipping pages. I like that structure. It's leaner, less risk exposure on the tech side. I watched from the other end of the table, this time not from the printer corner but from a designated guest chair, a nameplate in front of me, Juliet Dayne, military liaison advisor. I hadn't demanded it, I didn't need to. They had requested my attendance. My father sat 3 seats down, silent. Logan beside him. Neither spoke when my name was mentioned, but they didn't correct the room either. They let the respect land. After the meeting, I stayed behind while folders were collected, coffee cups stacked, and polite nods exchanged. The CEO, a tall, deliberate man named Hugh Renner, turned to me with a curious smile. That framework from your cybersecurity procurement protocol? Is that from the Red Springs case? I nodded once. Part of it. The rest was from the breach in 2022. He let out a low whistle. You drafted that? Yes. Brilliant. We thought it was a group product. It was. He looked at me again, more slowly this time. But you were the one who saw the timing loophole. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. He extended a hand. Let me know if you ever leave the Pentagon. We'd be lucky to have your brain. I shook his hand once, firm, cool, steady. I'm exactly where I need to be, I said quietly. He nodded. That's what true operators say. Outside the glass building, Logan caught up with me before I reached the car. Why didn't you say anything in there? He asked. I slipped on my sunglasses. They were already quoting it. But it would have made a difference to say it out loud. I looked at him, calm. I didn't need the credit. I needed them to use it. He paused, then offered a wry smile. You know, they still call you the quiet one. I returned the look. Good. Logan frowned. You're okay with that? Yes, I said, because they'll remember what I didn't say more than what I did. Back at my office, I sat at my desk and opened the email thread from the Department of Defense. One thread was flagged as high priority FY26 Strategic Reallocation Proposal, Cyber Leadership Input Needed. I clicked it open. At the bottom of the email chain, someone had left a short note. Use Juliet's procurement model. It's still the gold standard. No fanfare, no award, just recognition. The kind that isn't given with applause, but with trust. Later that night, I received a text from my father. Just 3 lines. I saw the room today. They didn't need you to speak. They were already listening. I read it twice, then put the phone down. I didn't reply, because some acknowledgments only matter when they're spoken aloud, and some matter more when left unsaid. He finally understood, not just what I had done, but how I had done it. With quiet leadership, with strategy that couldn't be traced to my name because it didn't need to be, with the kind of revenge that doesn't humiliate but transforms. They used to call me invisible. Now they quote me in boardrooms they once told me I didn't belong in. And still, they call me the quiet one. Good. Let them. Because sometimes the loudest legacy is the one built in silence. There's something strange about coming home, when the definition of home has changed in your absence. The house I grew up in still stood tall at the edge of Manassas, Virginia, with its white shutters and brick chimney and the magnolia tree I used to climb until my palms bled. But it wasn't home anymore, not in the way it had once been, because now, for the first time, they were the ones knocking on my door. 3 months had passed since the boardroom meeting where my defense protocol was quoted like scripture, since Logan's late-night text admitting I had outpaced them all, and since my father's reluctant, wordless nod, the first acknowledgement in years that didn't come wrapped in correction or condescension. They asked to visit, not for business, but because they were curious about me. Not Juliet the daughter, not Juliet the disappointment, Juliet the colonel, the strategist, the one who had learned to make silence sound like authority. I set out a tray of black coffee and warm cornbread, out of habit, not hospitality. My father arrived first, dressed in the same navy blazer I'd seen him wear to every holiday gathering and awards banquet. Logan followed, looser at the edges than before. There were no insults, no veiled jokes, just a careful kind of quiet, like they weren't sure what version of me they'd meet. They sat in my kitchen, at the same table where I'd drafted deployment plans for classified operations. I've never been here before, my father said softly, scanning the room. I know, I replied, pouring the coffee. Logan cleared his throat. You decorated this yourself? I nodded. Every shelf, every photo, every plant. He looked up. It feels like you. That was new. I offered a tour. Brief, clinical, not sentimental. I didn't need their admiration. I only needed them to see what I'd built without their applause. In the study, my military commendations lined one wall, discreetly, not proudly. My framed cybersecurity protocols were in a corner, next to a case of redacted binders labeled only with years and regions. My father paused at one. "You ran this operation?" he asked, tapping the 2021 ledger. "I designed the full tactical data response. The actual execution was done by field specialists." He turned toward me. "I would have never guessed." "That's the point," I said. He stood in silence, his hand still resting on the edge of the case. Not a word of praise, but no denial either. It was enough. That night, after they left, I sat by the fireplace with my dog curled beside me, a glass of wine in hand, and the hum of an old jazz record spinning low in the background. It occurred to me that I had spent most of my adult life trying to prove myself to a family who had already made up their minds. But it wasn't about proving anything anymore. Because in every room that mattered, in the Pentagon, in policy review, in international procurement panels, I was already seen. And the sweetest kind of revenge wasn't delivered in fury. It wasn't a slam of doors or a shouted resume. It wasn't public humiliation or sharp rebuke. It was being so undeniably excellent. They had no choice but to return. Return to the one they ignored, to ask advice from the daughter they once dismissed, to eat cornbread at a table they never helped set. Months later, I gave a keynote at the Defense Women in Strategy Summit in D.C. My name was listed third on the bill, right under 2 senators. When I stepped to the podium, the room was full. Logan was there, my father too. Not in the front row, but not in the shadows either. I spoke of cybersecurity, yes, but I ended with something else. Power isn't in how loud you speak, it's in how calm you stay when others dismiss you. Because if you're quiet long enough, the ones who doubted you will start repeating your words without realizing where they came from. The room went still. And then, they rose. When I descended the stage, Logan met me halfway, eyes full of something I hadn't seen since we were children, pride untainted by competition. "You don't just belong in the room," he said. "You built the damn room." I smiled, not for validation, but because I had already known that for years. Now, finally, they did too. And that's the truth of it. I was never just a soldier. I was a strategist, a daughter, a leader, and yes, a quiet kind of storm. The kind they never saw coming, the kind that rewrote everything, without ever raising her voice. This isn't just a military revenge story. It's a masterclass in power without noise. Juliet Dayne's arc speaks for every woman whose excellence was muted by familiarity, then revealed with grace that required no spectacle. Her silence wasn't passive. It was poised. This story will resonate deeply with professionals, daughters, veterans, and anyone who's had to outgrow the version of themselves others refuse to update. If Juliet's quiet power struck a chord, hit subscribe to Revenge with Seren, where the strongest revenge is earned, not screamed.